fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like, you have to do, I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, you know, it's almost, he called it fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was on put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to, like, even before that, I had done a show where I was, like, trying to break down these topics. I was like, a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the, like, most fair case you could make about it's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C, who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, you know, people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? Like, how?
You know, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, you know, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So, like, the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese, or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or, you know, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering, like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? Really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there, and all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like, stuff. You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. Or system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Whoa.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh. That's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly. Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. You're the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did
views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit. Like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no, I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, you know, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. That's the issue was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the house made. So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable, was going to undo sort of everything. Like, if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and Vic.
And then when you have them on, there's a lot of I wasn't aware. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that. I don't know. There was all this hemming and
FTX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like, it was very opaque. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is you believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To this big mess right now. And we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene. But, right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. Abilities, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady. Dan
Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. Guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
Her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this. And then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. Okay, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. And ultimately, one of the ways, like, even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about, and they were like donating through him for like all these senators' office reached out to me and they're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to. This is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah,
about him trying.
That's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it, and it's amazing.
What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like, they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch and then on sticks or something. Like, it was never – the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? You're Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere – and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like, I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, it's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, success. 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But it's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your...
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they balances? But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. It's you find wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like, hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that Washington, and I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like, it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, I wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to it was the terms with regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately, LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through who's, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. Like, it's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense, but he cleaned up on all his own customers, just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out. So CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. How are you going to make some money? And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's
on and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could
eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Well,
yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all find out like there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy Dan. It's it's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, this is a fraud because no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme outright. The proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of, there is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. Just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see them in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of, you can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put it.
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, all these other wallets, that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. It's like the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was a someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys?
Whiz kid, who you listen to him talk, he has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. Like I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
You know, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want, there was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. You know, everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now, smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too. Where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually, I'll have to, my feeling is offshore entities should not be, they're not subject to our rules. How can you allow offshore, like, yeah, I don't know. It's very,
And probably overly confident.
yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, you know, he was like saying FTX US was hacked that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big, like, kind of scary, strange, and these offshore entities were also using, like, U.S. branches. Like, there's FTX U.S., which was, like, more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just, like, when are they going to find out? It just, he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have fixed one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their...
Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
you can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this, and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to, he's doing interviews with that. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China. Like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here. Maybe that's a big deal. So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all time, but FTX was sort of the worst offender, is let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything. It's Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, he's I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No, I'm sorry. I'm blanking on, it's this famous, I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous, really taking that, I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that.
Labeled the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
So the person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami, but that person eventually give you this yield. He starts explaining like this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme, and so ultimately Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short
down because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
You know, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, you're A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all the and like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. Lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams, or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house like reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in in a stew. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX is for a while. But like so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers and I wanted somebody to say.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
somebody found out about this God mode, and so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, heck, nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this back door located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do that. But like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's... What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a private call, leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that with the scandal now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, the son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness, really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became NFT. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling... There was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few people...
That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? this guy.
What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So
Yeah,
how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on.
I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up, or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just, very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer. After the fact, he's like, still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
I start hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is, I didn't really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like, just like hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these, like, get rich seminars. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So the money system has to be safe. Like, your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to what that was, to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like, they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our balance. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, and basically like, shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later. But you actually own a bunch. You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash. Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually, the problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I studied service that said, you cannot move, like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over.
Whoa.
Like, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this shit from the arms of one huckster to another. Like, it's just like it's almost to something worse. You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on chain all our fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong, they bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names and also reputations.
Like, what exactly? Like, what are the regulations in terms of like what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to calling that a fraud early. I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud.
Binance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. It's left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the